April 27th, 1521. Morning. Imagine you are standing in the surf off the coast of an island in what we now call the Philippines. The water surging up to your knees is warm, but the coral beneath your boots is razor sharp. Absolute chaos, total unmitigated chaos surrounds you. The air is filled with the screaming of men and the clash of steel. You hear the sickening thud of wood striking wood, and the heavy smell of smoke chokes the air because a village is burning nearby. The water around you is slowly turning red. Right in the middle of this mayhem stands one man. He's wearing heavy European armor, likely rusting after months at sea. He wears a helmet, but he is limping badly. He's completely, utterly surrounded. This is not a fair fight. It is not a duel. We are talking about 49 exhausted, starving Europeans against at least 1,500 local warriors fighting on their home turf. The lone figure in the center is the most feared navigator in the world. This is the man who did what everyone said was impossible. He crossed the ocean of darkness. He found a secret passage at the bottom of the world. Yet now, thousands of miles from the royal courts of Europe, he is being hacked at with bamboo spears and fire-hardened scimitars. The tragic irony is that he did not need to be there. Not at all. This battle was a choice. He was not fighting for his king at that moment. He was not fighting for survival. He was fighting for his own pride. A poisoned arrow hits his leg. A bamboo spear finds a gap in his armor. He falls face down into the water. Just like that, Ferdinand Magellan is dead. A brutal, lonely end to one of the most ambitious lives in all of human history. Welcome to History Titans. Before we unpack the rest of this incredible saga, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment below if you love history as much as we do. It helps us keep these stories alive. Today, we are going to unpack the full story of Ferdinand Magellan. For most of us, the story we learned in school was simple. Magellan sailed around the world. We need to clear up that first big misconception right away. Spoiler alert, he did not make it. He did not even come close. But the story of how he got to that beach in Mactan is so much more intense than a simple boat trip. It is a story of mutiny, starvation, execution, betrayal, and a man who literally broke the map of the known world, only to be completely destroyed by his own ego. We have a stack of sources to guide us, including the chronicles of Antonio Pigafetta, who was an eyewitness to all of this. His journal is the main reason we know these details. We also have ships, logs, royal wills, and modern historical analysis. Our mission is to get past the textbook summary. We want to understand the man himself and the brutal reality of a voyage driven by the political Cold War between Spain and Portugal. We must talk about the cost. We always celebrate the achievement that the globe is round, but we rarely stop to look at the staggering price paid in human lives to prove that fact. Let us rewind. Before he was a body in the surf in the Philippines, who was Ferdinand Magellan. He was not Spanish, even though he sailed for Spain. He was Portuguese. Born Fernando Magalhães around the year 1480. We are not sure of the exact town. Maybe Sabrosa. Maybe Porto in northern Portugal. We do know he was born into the nobility. His family were fidalgos. This translates literally to son of somebody, minor nobility. Not a prince or a duke, but he had a bloodline. His father was the mayor of his town. The turning point in his early life happened when he was about 10 years old. He was orphaned. For a boy of noble blood at that time, being an orphan could be a ticket to a much bigger world. Because of his family status, he and his brother were sent to the royal court in Lisbon to serve as pages to Queen Leonor. When you picture a page, do not just think of holding the queen's train or fetching wine. You have to understand what the Portuguese court was in the late 1400s. This was not just a place for parties. This was the Silicon Valley of the 16th century. This was the dawn of the Age of Discovery. Portugal was the global superpower in navigation and maritime technology. Queen Leonor's School of Pages was a de facto university for cartography, astronomy, and celestial navigation. Magellan grew up hearing the gossip from the fleets. He heard rumors of Vasco da Gama reaching India. He saw charts that were treated as state secrets. charts that if leaked to the Spanish would result in execution for treason. He soaked in the most advanced geographic and astronomic data on the planet. He learned to use an astrolabe and how to read the stars. But Magellan did not stay in the classroom. In 1505, at about 25 years old, he enlisted. He joined the Navy. He joined the massive Portuguese India Armada, led by Francisco de Almeida. This is where he transformed from a student into a hardened warrior. This was not a cruise. This was a war for control of the entire global economy. At this time, the spice trade was everything. Cloves, nutmeg, pepper. These things were literally worth more than their weight in gold. For centuries, Muslim traders along with Arab, Ottoman, and Venetian middlemen controlled these routes. Portugal had one goal: to cut them out and break the monopoly by force. Magellan spent the next 7 or 8 years in the East Indies in the thick of it. He fought in the Battle of Cananore in 1506. He was at the major Battle of Diu in 1509. The Battle of Diu was decisive, or it was Portugal against a combined fleet of the Sultan of Gujarat, the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, and the Zamorin of Calicut, supported by the Republic of Venice and the Ottoman Empire. A huge coalition. The Portuguese smashed them. They destroyed the Egyptian fleet and secured the Indian Ocean for the next century. Magellan was there. He was wounded. He saw brutal hand-to-hand combat. He was not just a map guy. He was a professional soldier and a killer. A pivotal moment arrived in 1511 during the conquest of Malacca in modern-day Malaysia. Malacca was one of the most important trading hubs in the world, the gateway to the Spice Islands. During the fighting, Magellan saved the life of his cousin and close friend Francisco Serrao. That friendship became critical. Serrao did not go back to Portugal. He eventually made his way to the Spice Islands themselves, the Moluccas, and settled there. He basically went native. He started writing letters back to his friend Magellan describing a world of unbelievable wealth. He told Magellan that the islands were overflowing with cloves and nutmeg. Those letters planted the seed of Magellan's obsession. He knew the source was real. While in Malacca, Magellan also acquired someone who became a major character in this story. He bought a slave, a young man we know as Enrique of Malacca. Magellan had him baptized and gave him the name Enrique. We do not know his original name, but Enrique stayed by Magellan's side for the rest of his life. He traveled back to Europe with him. He went into battle with him in Morocco and eventually boarded the ships for the Great Voyage, where his story holds one of the most incredible twists in this saga. So Magellan had spent nearly a decade fighting for Portugal in the East. He was a decorated war hero who had learned the secret trade routes. He returns to Portugal around 1512 or 1513. He expects a hero's welcome. You would absolutely think so. But he returns almost penniless. The crown did not pay common soldiers and junior officers well. Then things get even worse. He is sent on another military campaign, this time to Morocco to fight the Moors at Azamor. It is a dirty, gritty campaign. During a skirmish, Magellan takes a bad wound. A lance or a scimitar strikes his leg. This is the injury that gives him that permanent limp. For the rest of his life, he walks with a painful hitch, but the physical injury was nothing compared to the insult that came next. He was accused of corruption. The allegation was specific. They said he was stealing from the crown by selling war spoils, specifically cattle captured from the enemy back to the enemy. War profiteering. He was investigated and officially cleared. The charges were proven false. But in the stuffy, rumor-filled world of the Portuguese court, the mud stuck. His reputation was ruined. He was damaged goods. With a limp and a stained reputation, he goes to the King of Portugal, King Manuel I. Magellan, believing he has served his country loyally for years, asks for two things: a tiny increase in his royal pension, just a few coins a month, and command of a ship to go back to the Indies. A reasonable request for a veteran officer. But the king despised him. King Manuel was known for being tight with money, but sources say he also personally disliked Magellan. He found him arrogant and pushy. The king refuses the pension. He refuses the command. Magellan asks again, refused. He petitions a third time. On this final attempt, the king essentially looks at him and tells him he has no use for him. He tells him to go offer his services to whomever he wants. "I have no use for you." That is as cold as it gets. It is a total rejection. He is effectively firing him from being a Portuguese nobleman. It was a massive strategic blunder by King Manuel. He had one of the most experienced and driven navigators in his entire empire, and he let him walk out the door over a petty personal dislike and a few coins. Magellan takes him at his word. In 1517, he packs his bags. He renounces his Portuguese citizenship and crosses the border into Spain. He goes to Seville. You have to understand the magnitude of this. Spain and Portugal were the world's two superpowers, locked in a cold war over control of the globe. A Portuguese captain of Magellan's experience defecting to Spain was like a top Soviet rocket scientist defecting to the United States during the space race. It is treason in all but name. He arrives in Seville. A man with a limp, a Malay slave named Enrique, and a truly crazy idea. First, he is smart. He makes connections. He marries Beatriz Barbosa, which gives him access to the court. Then he gets an audience with King Charles I of Spain. Picture this. Charles is a teenager. He is only 18 years old, yet he is running the Spanish Empire. Charles was young and ambitious. He wanted to make a mark bigger than his Portuguese rivals. Magellan comes to him with a proposal that is music to his ears. To understand the pitch, we must look at the Treaty of Tordesillas, back in 1494 to stop Spain and Portugal from going to war. The Pope drew a line down the middle of the Atlantic. Everything to the east, including Africa, India, and the Spice Islands belonged to Portugal. Everything to the west, the newly discovered Americas, belonged to Spain. Portugal had a legal monopoly on the spice trade route around Africa. Magellan comes to the young King Charles and argues two incredibly bold things. First, he pulls out secret maps. He argues that the world is bigger than they think. He claims the Spice Islands are actually so far east that they wrap all the way around the globe and fall into the Spanish half of the world. He was wrong. Nobody knew for sure, but it was a brilliant piece of salesmanship based on fuzzy geography. Second, and this is the real kicker, he tells the king he can get there by sailing west through Spanish territory. He claims he knows of a secret strait, a passage through the South American continent that connects the Atlantic to the other ocean. He did not know. He was bluffing, or at least gambling, on inaccurate maps and letters from his friend Serrao. He believed it was there. The pitch worked. Charles saw a potential loophole to get the spices without starting a direct war with Portugal. He gives him the money. In March of 1518, the funding is approved. Magellan is made Captain General of the Armada de Molucca. It sounds grand. The reality was different. He got 5 ships. Do not picture majestic warships. These were the used car equivalents of the naval world. Old creaky merchant vessels called carracks, covered in black tar to keep them watertight. Dark and grimy. The flagship was the Trinidad. Then the biggest, the San Antonio, the Concepcion, the Victoria, and the smallest, the Santiago, which was basically a scout ship. The crew consisted of about 270 men. It was a complete mix. A United Nations of sailors, Spanish, Portuguese, Italians, Greeks, French, Germans, and of course Enrique the Malay interpreter. But this international crew was not a happy melting pot. It was a disaster waiting to happen. The Spanish captains and officers hated Magellan. They saw him as a Portuguese traitor and resented taking orders from him. Meanwhile, King Manuel in Portugal finds out about the expedition and is furious. No, he sends spies and saboteurs to Seville to stop the fleet. There were riots on the docks. It was a mess from day one. You have a paranoid commander who trusts no one, a mutinous officer corps, aging ships, a mission to find a place that might not even exist. On September 20th, 1519, they finally sail. 5 ships heading out into the Atlantic. The tension starts to boil over almost immediately. The Spanish captains, led by Juan de Cartagena, captain of the San Antonio, start openly disrespecting Magellan. Cartagena refuses to give Magellan the proper salute at the end of the day, a huge breach of naval protocol. He is testing him, acting like a co-commander. Magellan, who is already paranoid, shuts it down. He convenes a council, has Cartagena arrested, and puts him in the stocks on the deck of another ship. He does not mess around. It sends a clear message, but creates deep, simmering resentment among the other Spanish officers. They feel their leader has been humiliated by this Portuguese upstart. They cross the Atlantic and make a stop in Brazil for supplies. Things are okay for a bit. Fresh food, friendly locals, but then they have to turn south. They move along the coast of what is now Argentina, looking for this mythical strait. They keep going south. It gets colder and colder, more desolate. They check the massive estuary of the River Plate, thinking that might be the strait. It is not. It is just a river, a dead end. They have to keep pushing south into the complete unknown. No European had ever been this far south. Winter is coming. Southern Hemisphere winter. It is March of 1520. The weather turns violent. Magellan makes the call to pull into a desolate freezing bay. He named San Julian to wait it out for 5 months. Morale collapses. The men are freezing. Rations are being cut. They are all convinced that their commander is a madman who has led them to the end of the world on a wild goose chase. It is during this long, dark winter that they have a very strange encounter. They meet the locals. This is where the myth of the Patagonian giants comes from. Pigafetta the chronicler writes in his journal that these people were so tall that the Europeans only came up to their waists. They were likely not actual giants. They probably averaged around 6 feet, which compared to the malnourished 16th century European sailor, who was maybe 5'4", would have seemed gigantic. Pigafetta was exaggerating for effect. It reveals a really dark side of the expedition. There is a disturbing story about how they treated the locals they called giants. It is awful. Magellan decided he wanted to capture a couple of them to take back to Spain as specimens for the king. Like animals, he used deception. He had his men give the locals gifts, mirrors, bells, scissors. While they were distracted, he showed them heavy iron leg shackles. He indicated through gestures that they were also gifts. The locals who had never seen shackles thought they were shiny ornaments. They let the sailors put the shackles on their ankles. Once they were on, the sailors drove the bolts in. They were trapped. It was pure treachery. They kept 2 of them on the ships. Both died during the Pacific crossing, likely from a combination of malnutrition and disease. It is an ugly episode that shows the mindset of the expedition. Everything and everyone was a resource to be exploited. Back in San Julian, the immediate danger was not from the outside, it was from within, the Easter Mutiny. This is the moment where the entire voyage nearly came to a violent end. It happened on Easter Sunday, April 1st, 1520. 3 of the 5 ships, the San Antonio de Concepcion and the Victoria, rose up against Magellan. The mutineers led by the Spanish captains seized control. Magellan was trapped. He only controlled his own ship, the Trinidad, and the tiny scout ship, the Santiago. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and stuck in a frozen bay thousands of miles from help. Any normal commander would negotiate surrender and try to sail home. Magellan did not negotiate. This is where the ruthless soldier from India came out. He decided to strike. He sent a small boat with a few loyal men over to the Victoria, which was captained by one of the lead mutineers, Luis de Mendoza. They were carrying a letter. It was a diversion. While Mendoza was reading the letter, Magellan's constable, who was on the boat, pulled out a dagger and stabbed Mendoza in the neck, killing him instantly. At the same time, another boat filled with loyal armored men stormed the ship. It was a lightning strike. In a matter of minutes, Magellan regained control of the Victoria. Now the odds were 3 ships to 2 in his favor. He moved his ships to block the entrance to the bay. The other 2 mutinous ships realized they were trapped. After a brief standoff, they surrendered. The punishment for mutiny was medieval and designed to create terror. Mendoza's body was dragged ashore, beheaded, and then drawn and quartered. His body parts were stuck on spikes as a warning. The other captain, Gaspar de Quesada, of the Concepcion, was beheaded. His own foster brother was forced to be the executioner. Magellan could not execute Cartagena, the original ringleader, because he had too many powerful friends back at the Spanish court. So he did something arguably worse. When the fleet finally left San Julian months later, They took Cartagena and a priest who had also joined the mutiny and marooned them. They left them on that desolate Patagonian coast with a small supply of biscuits and wine and sailed away. They were never seen or heard from again. He reasserted control through purifying force, but they lost a ship during this time. Then the small scout ship, the Santiago, was wrecked in a storm while scouting further south. The crew survived, but the ship was lost. Now they were down to 4 ships. They continued on. Finally, in October of 1520, after more than a year of searching, they found it. They found an entrance. A narrow, treacherous-looking passage Magellan called the Strait of All Saints. We call it the Strait of Magellan. It is a navigational nightmare, a maze of fjords and dead ends with unpredictable currents and sudden violent winds called willy-waws that could capsize a ship in an instant. It took them 38 days to navigate it. In the middle of this confusing, dangerous maze, another disaster struck. The biggest ship, the San Antonio, which was carrying the largest share of their food and supplies, got separated from the fleet while exploring a channel. The crew, led by the pilot, Esteban Gomes, mutinied again. A quiet mutiny this time. They overpowered Magellan's cousin, who was captain, locked him in chains and turned the ship around. They deserted the expedition and sailed all the way back to Spain. Magellan did not know at first. He wasted days searching for them, thinking they were lost. Eventually, he had to accept the truth. They were gone, and they took most of the food with them. This was a critical, devastating blow. When Magellan's remaining 3 ships finally emerged from the western end of the strait, they were already on the brink of starvation. But he looked out and saw a vast, calm, beautiful ocean. Compared to the violent storms of the Atlantic, it looked peaceful. So he named it Mar Pacifico, the peaceful sea, the Pacific. This is where the single greatest miscalculation in the history of exploration happened. Based on his faulty maps, Magellan believed the Spice Islands were just a few weeks' sail away. He thought the Pacific was a relatively small body of water. He had no idea. He had just entered the largest single geographical feature on the face of the Earth. He was about to lead 3 underprovisioned ships across a void that covers 1/3 of the planet's surface. The crossing of death. They were out there for 98 days. Over 3 months without seeing anything but 2 tiny uninhabited rocky islands that they could not land on. They called them the Unfortunate Islands. Pigafetta's account of the food situation is stomach-turning. He writes that the ship's biscuit had long ago turned to a powder stinking of the urine of rats. It was full of grubs. The men were literally eating worm-eaten rat soil dust. They were drinking yellow, putrid water that had been in the barrels for months. When the biscuit powder was gone, they started eating the oxhide leather. The leather wrapped around the main yard of the mast to prevent chafing. They had to drag it in the sea for 4 or 5 days just to soften it up. Then they would grill it over embers and try to choke it down. They ate sawdust from the planks. Rats became a gourmet food. A starving sailor would sell a ship's rat to another for half a ducat, a huge sum of money. Then came the disease, scurvy, the plague of the sea. It is a hideous way to die, a simple vitamin C deficiency. But they did not know that. The body's connective tissues just dissolve. Pigafetta gives a horrifying description of the men's gums swelling up so much that they grew over their teeth, and they could not eat at all. Their joints swelled. Old wounds reopened and bled. At least 19 men died during the crossing. Some sources say closer to 30. They died in agony on the decks. It is a miracle that anyone survived. Yet even in the midst of this unimaginable suffering, they looked up at the unfamiliar southern sky, and Pigafetta documented new stars. He noticed 2 cloudy patches of light. They are actually dwarf galaxies orbiting our own Milky Way. Even as they were dying, they were expanding humanity's knowledge of the cosmos. Finally, in March of 1521 land, the island of Guam. They were basically skeletons stumbling ashore, desperate for fresh food and water. But the very first interaction with the local Chamorro people went disastrously wrong. The Chamorros were amazing sailors. They came out in their flying proas outrigger canoes and swarmed the Spanish ships. They were curious and started taking things. To them, property was likely a communal concept, but to the starving, paranoid Europeans, it was theft. When the locals took the captain's skiff, a small boat tied to the stern, Magellan just snapped. He led an armed party ashore. They burned 40 or 50 houses and a number of boats. They killed 7 Chamorro men. They got their skiff back and fresh food, but left a trail of blood and fire. Magellan bitterly named the islands the Islas de los Ladrones, the Islands of Thieves, a terrible omen for what was to come. They sailed on. A few days later, they finally reached the Philippines. Soon they landed first on an uninhabited island, Homonhon, to recover. Then they moved on to Limasawa. Here something absolutely incredible happened. This is the Enrique moment. It gives me chills every time I read about it. They saw a canoe of locals approaching. Magellan tried to communicate, but nobody understood each other. Then he told Enrique to try speaking. Enrique called out to them in his native Malay dialect, and the men in the canoe understood him. Stop and think about that. Enrique was captured in Malacca, taken west across the Indian Ocean, around Africa to Portugal, then crossed the Atlantic, all of South America, the entire vast Pacific. And now, on the other side of the world, he was hearing his own language again. Enrique the slave had effectively completed a linguistic circumnavigation of the globe before Magellan or any other European. He was in a very real sense the first one back to his home region. That fact completely changed the power dynamic on the ship. Suddenly, Enrique was not just a servant anymore. He was the most important man in the entire fleet. He was their voice, their only bridge to this new world. With Enrique translating, they moved on to the major trading port of Cebu. There, Magellan met the local ruler, Raja Humabon. At first, this relationship went incredibly well, almost too well. Magellan and Humabon became allies. They performed a blood compact, becoming blood brothers. Then Magellan started preaching Christianity. This became an obsession for him. The mission suddenly changed from finding spices to saving souls. He went full evangelist, consumed by it. Amazingly, Humabon and his court agreed to convert, and they were baptized along with hundreds of their subjects. Magellan gave the Queen of Cebu a small statue of the baby Jesus, the Santo Niño de Cebu, which is still one of the most venerated religious icons in the Philippines today. But this conversion came with a dangerous promise. Magellan told Humabon that if he accepted Christianity, the King of Spain would make him the supreme ruler over all the other chiefs in the region. Magellan was wading into local politics deeply. He promised to use Spanish military might to crush Humabon's enemies as a way to prove the power of the Christian God. It was pure hubris. He started demanding that all the other local chiefs submit to Humabon's authority, and by extension to Spain. One chief said no, a man named Lapu-Lapu from the small neighboring island of Mactan. Lapu-Lapu basically said, "I bow to no one. I do not care about your new god or your Spanish king." Magellan took this as a personal insult, a direct challenge to his authority and his faith. His own officers begged him not to get involved. They said, "Let the local chiefs fight their own battles. Our mission is to get to the Spice Islands. We are so close now." But Magellan would not listen. He wanted to make an example of Lapu-Lapu. He wanted to show off and prove that a handful of armored Spaniards were invincible. That brings us to the morning of April 27th, the scene we started with. Magellan mustered a force of 60 men, but only 49 actually went ashore to fight an army of, by some estimates, 1,500 warriors. He proceeded to make every single tactical mistake possible. First, he decided to attack at low tide, a critical error. The island of Mactan is surrounded by coral reefs. Because the tide was out, the ships could not get close to the shore. They had to anchor hundreds of yards away. This meant their cannons, their single biggest technological advantage, were completely out of range and useless. They had to jump out of the long boats and wade through thigh-deep water, over sharp coral for a very long distance, just to get to the beach. They were tired and vulnerable before the fight even started. Their muskets and crossbows were firing from too far away. The Mactan warriors had large wooden shields that were effective at that distance. Muskets of that era took a long time to reload, so after one volley they were not much use. It quickly became a melee. 49 exhausted men with swords against an army. The Mactan warriors were smart. They identified the Europeans' weakness immediately. The Spaniards had steel armor on their torsos and heads, but their legs were mostly unprotected. No leg armor for an amphibious landing, as it would be too heavy. The warriors started aiming low, throwing a shower of poison-tipped arrows and fire-hardened bamboo spears at their legs. Pigafetta was there right next to Magellan. He was wounded himself, and describes Magellan getting shot in the leg with a poisoned arrow. Magellan tried to order an organized retreat, but it was too late. Most of his men panicked and fled back towards the boats. Only a small group, maybe 6 or 8 men, stayed with their captain. Then Magellan made another mistake. He ordered his men to burn the village, hoping it would create a diversion. A terrible move. It did not distract them. It just enraged them even more. Seeing their homes burning, they swarmed Magellan's small group. Pigafetta writes that they knocked his helmet off twice. He fought bravely, but got wounded in the arm with a spear and could not draw his sword from its scabbard. He was effectively disarmed, helpless. A warrior with a large scimitar rushed forward and slashed him on his unarmored leg. He stumbled and fell face first into the water. Then it was over. Pigafetta gives a moving eulogy, saying they all rushed upon him with lances of iron and of bamboo, so that they slew our mirror, our light, our comfort, and our true guide. You can feel the devastation. The invincible Captain General was dead. The survivors on the ships tried to ransom Magellan's body. They offered Lapu-Lapu a large amount of merchandise, copper and iron. Lapu-Lapu refused. He kept Magellan's body as a trophy of his victory. It was never recovered. Ferdinand Magellan has no grave. What a lonely end. But the nightmare for the crew was not over. In some ways, it just got worse. With Magellan dead, the aura of Spanish invincibility was completely shattered. Raja Humabon, their supposed ally in Cebu, realized he probably backed the wrong side. Then there was the Enrique factor. Magellan's will stated that upon his death, Enrique was to be freed. He was legally a free man. But the new commanders Duarte Barbosa and Juan Serrao refused to honor it. They told Enrique he was still a slave and that they needed him as a translator. Incredibly cruel after everything he had been through. Enrique must have been furious. It is widely believed that he went secretly to Humabon and helped plot a trap. He told him the Spaniards were weak and that now was the time to strike. Humabon invited the new European leaders to a banquet, a farewell feast, claiming he had a gift of jewels for their king. About 24 of the top officers and crewmen went ashore. Pigafetta, luckily for him and for history, stayed behind nursing his wound from Mactan. Suddenly from the ships they heard screaming. It was a massacre. The Red Wedding of the Pacific. Most of the men who went ashore were slaughtered. They dragged Captain Juan Serrao down to the beach wounded and bleeding. He begged the men on the ships to pay a ransom for him. They did not. The new commander on the ships, a man named Carvalho, was terrified, thinking it was a trap to lure more of them ashore. He ordered the ships to raise anchor and sail away, leaving Serrao screaming for his life on the beach. He just abandoned him. They abandoned him, and Enrique is never seen again. The prevailing theory is that he stayed in Cebu, finally a free man in his home region. So now the fleet is leaderless. They are traumatized, and down to 3 ships. They do not have enough healthy men to sail all 3. They have lost so many to scurvy, to the battle, and now to the massacre. They make the hard decision to scuttle the Conception. They strip it of anything valuable and set it on fire. Just 2 ships remain out of the original 5, the Trinidad and the Victoria. They spend the next few months basically blundering around the East Indies, even resorting to piracy to survive. And then finally in November of 1521 they find it. The Moluccas, the Spice Islands. They have made it. They land at Tidore, and the local sultan is friendly. They trade everything they have left for cloves. They load the 2 ships to the brim with precious fragrant cloves. But getting home is another problem. A huge problem. The flagship, the Trinidad, is leaking badly. It is practically falling apart and needs major repairs. So they make a fateful decision to split up. The Trinidad will try to sail back east across the Pacific to Spanish territory in Panama. It is a complete disaster. They sail into headwinds. They starve. They are eventually forced to turn back and are captured by the Portuguese. The ship is wrecked in a storm. Almost none of that crew ever makes it home. But the other ship, the Victoria, will try to make a run for it, west across the Indian Ocean and around Africa, trying to dodge the Portuguese the entire way. And who is the new captain of the Victoria? This is the ultimate irony of the story. The captain is Juan Sebastian Elcano, the same Elcano who was one of the lead mutineers back in Patagonia. The very same man who tried to overthrow Magellan and turn back is now in charge of completing Magellan's mission. You cannot make this stuff up. Elcano leads them on this epic, desperate voyage home. They starve again. More men die of scurvy. They have to sail a non-stop 10,000-mile journey across the Indian Ocean to avoid Portuguese patrols. On September 6, 1522, nearly 3 years after they left, a single battered ship limps into a Spanish harbor. The Victoria. It was like a ghost ship. Her sails were in tatters. When she docked, only 18 skeletal ghost-like men stumbled off that boat. 18 out of the 270 who originally set out, but they had done it. They were the first humans to ever circumnavigate the planet Earth. And here is the final mind-boggling detail. The cargo of cloves on that one surviving ship was so valuable that it paid for the entire cost of the original 5-ship expedition, covered all the losses, and still turned a handsome profit for the investors. That is capitalism in a nutshell. 250 men dead, but the venture was profitable. Let us unpack the legacy here, because scientifically, this changed everything. It was the first empirical proof that the world was round. Educated people had known it for centuries, but this was the hard physical proof. It proved the sheer scale of the planet. It showed the Pacific was this vast, immense ocean, not some small sea. It forced every mapmaker in Europe to throw out their old maps and start again. Then there was that strange phenomenon of the lost day. Picafetta was a meticulous record keeper. He noted down what happened every single day in his journal. But when the Victoria reached the Cape Verde Islands, which were Portuguese, he went ashore and asked what day it was. The locals told him it was Thursday, but in his diary, it was Wednesday. He was terrified. He thought in all that misery, he had missed a day. But what they had actually discovered completely by accident was the need for an international dateline. By sailing west with the sun, they had experienced one fewer sunrise than the people who stayed home. It was a major scientific discovery, born from a simple diary entry. But for Magellan himself, his personal legacy is just tragic. Utterly tragic. He died a violent death thousands of miles from home. His body was never recovered. Back in Spain, his wife Beatriz and his infant son Rodrigo both died of illness before the news of his death even reached them. His entire direct family line was extinguished. The glory at the time all went to Elcano. The king gave Elcano a coat of arms with a globe on it, and the Latin motto, Primus circumdidiste me. You were the first to circumnavigate me. For a long time, Magellan was painted as a failure, a traitor by the Portuguese, and a reckless foreigner by many in Spain. It took centuries for history to give him the proper credit for being the visionary behind it all. So is he a hero or a villain? He is neither. He is a complex, brilliant, and deeply flawed man of his time. He was capable of incredible violence and cruelty, but also capable of inspiring loyalty. He was unbelievably brave, and in the end, fatally arrogant. He opened up the Pacific Ocean to the world, but he did not survive to see it. It is the ultimate cautionary tale about hubris. You can conquer the biggest ocean on the planet, but if you cannot conquer your own pride, it will destroy you in the end. History focuses so much on the one ship that made it back on Elcano and the survivors. But the real human story often lies with the man who had the vision to push them all off the edge of the map in the first place, and the immense price he paid for that vision. And perhaps the price paid by others, like Enrique, whose full story we will sadly never know. If you want to join us for more journeys into these forgotten corners of history, make sure you subscribe to History Titans, like this video, and share it with a friend who thinks they know how the world was discovered. Because trust us, we have plenty more stories to tell. Thanks for tuning in. We will see you on the next deep dive.